Welcome to a podcast about the adventures of a divorced entrepreneurial father. Now, this is a hub of stories, cautionary tales, and life lessons behind the daily struggle to do better and be better and ultimately to find new sparks in life. And even if no one listens to any of these episodes, but I leave something behind for my children that sparks something in or even for them, well, that's good enough for me. However, if you do like what you hear on SparkHub, please support us by linking to the show notes below each episode. And once you're there, please consider subscribing to this podcast on the platform of your choice. And for the best experience, our newsletter gives you the inside scoop, exclusive content, and advanced previews of what's coming next. And by the way, your data is always private with us. We don't sell it, and you can unsubscribe from all of that at any time you want without judgment. So let's begin. My name is Allan, and I have a heck of a story for you. The past 3 episodes were a deep dive trilogy in collaboration with my longtime friend Sarita, exploring divorce through emotional, financial, and legal lenses, and also explored from a male and a female perspective, or maybe put a better way, a former husband and a former wife, both of us with 2 children each, of opposite genders but common traits, personalities, and challenges. To this day, Sarita and I continue to support each other as parents, divorcees, and providers who have bigger dreams. Now, in this episode, I'm back to solo contemplation, and I'm going to look through the lens of an entrepreneur who remains ambitious but forced to be practical, and a parent who wants to leave a legacy for his kids, and as a former husband still living at home with his ex in a house we're trying to sell in a recession. So at the time I'm recording this, it's been 21 months since marital separation, 15 months since telling our children our union was over, which was brutal, 12 months of being on the market, selling our home, and 10 months after officially divorcing through family court. And my state of mind right now is, on all of these things, is honestly, it's best expressed in the image I chose for the episode cover art, the battle between the scorpion and the frog. Now, this episode will go wide and deep on how the fables I learned as a child are helping me change my behavior as I bumble through the many trials of adulthood, and I'm sure you will relate to what you're about to hear. So please strap in. I have a heck of a few fables for you. Have you ever been asked if you believe in God or a higher power, or if you adhere to should adhere to a specific religion? Well, here's how I feel about the matter of religion as articulated by comedian Eddie Griffith.
Everybody fighting over this religion shit. You understand me? The Christians say Jesus is the messenger. The Muslims say it's Muhammad. I say, who gives a who the messenger is? Did you get the message? They got the same damn message. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Science proves that to be a fact. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. Don't f with me, and I won't f with you.
A link to the full Eddie Griffith clip is in the show notes below. Be warned, might be funny, it might be offensive, but he swears a lot. So, what is the big spiritual message to look for when your life is in chaos? What's the big truth that we all share as humans? Is it one love? Is it treat others as you want to be treated? And most importantly can whatever you believe drive behavior change for the better, be it in you or in those around you? Well, God and religion are beyond the scope of today's episode, and probably beyond the scope of most of us, but except to say, whatever way you get the message will likely have some scriptures or texts containing fables and stories that teach morals and lessons to, I guess, inspire you in the day-to-day fog of life. And that's where I perk up at that level. Now, when I was young, I was exposed to 2 books in particular that continue to impact me today. One, by virtue of living in South Korea as a child, was the Book of Buddha, which is more philosophy than God-based religion per se, and it teaches impermanence at the macro level, and at the micro level, it's filled with parables around contemplation and seeking enlightenment and a moral high ground. But if I recall, it's been a while, but I seem to remember there was a lot of water references, or water seemed to be like a mainstay, but anyway, I could be misremembering. The other book that had a heavy impression on me was Aesop's Fables, which is the ancient Greek anthology, it's an anthology of anthropomorphic stories with a neat little moral packaged up at the end of each tale. Now, anthropomorphic, which I have problems pronouncing, means finding an explanation for behavior through stories that have animals acting like humans. So if I say, don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg, the moral is about the dangers of greed, instant gratification at the cost of building long-term wealth through patience, compound interest, and financial literacy, for example. Or don't be greedy. If I ask you not to cry wolf, you'll recognize the moral that lying or constant exaggeration leads to distrust, which leads to loyalty, reputational damage, and abandonment at a time when you might really need help, or just don't lie, or lying has consequences. So clearly there's certain themes and stories and morals that seem to have endured the test of time. It's across cultures and even language barriers, and even into modernity, replayed in different forms. So nowadays on social feeds, we have memes and video clips that, seem to recycle a lot of these themes. Now, if you go a step further, Aesop's Fables, Book of Buddha, alongside, say, Shakespeare's plays and the Abrahamic texts that underpin the three main monotheistic religions, much of which I know little about in terms of reading deeply, they all seem to be foundational templates on which all stories told in even our modern films or TVs or social media are based on. But actually, the real purpose and benefit of knowing fables, and be that with cuddly talking animals or derived from the scenes of a crucifixion, is that our ideas, or rather the ideas in the stories that we learn, should die in our minds before we make tragic mistakes in real life. Or put another way, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I'll go one further. Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So I'm going to tell you 3 fables in this episode that transcended everything I'm going through right now in life and in business and parenting. And I'll assume, dear listener, you probably are going through similar things yourself in your own way and maybe in different proportions. So today, in a very particularly chosen order, I'm going to talk about the 3 blind men and the elephant, the little red hen, and the scorpion and the frog, and reveal some neat little ideas and morals that help me frame things. And I ultimately hope spark in you some ideas or wisdom to deal with, well, whatever. And if nothing else, these are the stories I hope my children learn in their own way, even if by modern day memes. So kids, if you are listening, this is Daddy's top playlist for adulthood. In the link to the show notes below, there's a deeper dive on each of these, but I'm going to start with the first fable, The Blind Men and the Elephant. And from what I've gleaned, it's the earliest versions of this story are found in Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain texts. I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's Jain. So this is my version of it, how I tell it or remember it. Once upon a time, 3 blind men are taken to an elephant. Now, because they are blind, they have to discover the world around them through other senses, especially touch. So one blind man holds the elephant's trunk, one grips the tail, and the third puts his hand on the elephant's flank. Now, someone with vision, and I'm presuming who can see the whole elephant, then asks the blind men to describe the animal in front of them. Flank man describes the elephant as a wall, the tail holder describes a rope, and the trunk holder says he feels something akin to a big snake. And all of this causes an argument between the 3 because none of the blind men can agree on an objective description of the beast right in front of them. That's the way I remember the story in my own words, but I've since learned that there's different versions of the fable, but they all end in a fight with varying degrees of violence and sometimes resolution. But regardless, the big message here illustrates that everyone perceives things differently, and often you can't all see the big picture beyond one's own limited range of perception. So if I were to dive a little deeper and maybe had a glass of wine and a fire going, I could easily foster a conversation around relativism or the inexpressible nature of truth or the behavior of experts in fields that contradict theories, need for deeper understanding, respect for different perspectives on the same object of observation. You get the idea. But the story's powerful on so many levels because as a business person, I often have to deal with a massive range of different personalities, and they all have a varying degree of agendas and perspectives on valuation of time, valuation of money. So we're talking clients, investors, creatives, developers, startup founders, you name it. And somehow in all that, my niche is to try and paint to all of them either the full picture or a specific defined picture that might only be relevant and helpful to them, but feeds the big picture. It's not easy. And at the moment, alongside the startups I'm part of, I'm also offering business transformation as a consultant. So my role slashes across operations, vision, marketing, finance, and so much more. But if I try to observe what somebody really needs, and then often it helps for me to form the big picture, then you have to have the ability to package up the big picture into smaller pictures in a way that advances a business. So here's the twist that I've learned the hard way. None of the above that I've just described to you in business works with my own children. So no matter how valuable I might be in the business world or in a career or a job, I've discovered the hard way that at home, the dynamic is very often a completely different beast. Now, maybe it's not an elephant, it might be a wildebeest, but there's a whole set of different body parts and subjective agendas. And sometimes it's just hard to switch between the two. Both my children are completely different, for example, and I've tried to learn to be more patient when arguments erupt, either with them or between them, and to try to understand what they are seeing or feeling or perceiving. And like the story, arguments can ensue with varying degrees of escalation, I want to say. So during my cycle also of marriage and divorce, my biggest lesson and frustration, going through all the emotional, financial, and legal motions we've talked about in the previous episodes, were the perception gaps that caused so many frustrations and misunderstandings and still do to this day. So, my ex and I can't always agree on a big picture, and that's not blaming anyone. It's just the dynamic or even the finer details. And again, nobody's right or wrong as I say this. It's just we're holding different parts of an elephant and we might be describing different beasts. So I try to remain patient and empathetic to the bigger picture if things get misunderstood. And I wish I'd learned that lesson a lot longer ago, but it is what it is. So for example, on finance, I might see a 6 and someone else might see a 9. And technically we're both right. It's the same number written down, but we're looking at it from different sides of the number. So you can imagine how that plays out. And then there is a rather big cultural shift that happened over the past 7 years that really brings into focus how perceptions can change. And perhaps the story of the elephant and the blind man is even too simplistic. So imagine, if you will, for a moment, that in the story of the 3 blind men, before we get to the point where they're asked to describe the elephant, they have to move around the elephant and feel a different body part. So basically, each participant has to have a chance to be in the other participant's shoes, as it were. And when they're asked to describe the elephant, what would it look like? Well, I happen to know. When my children were young, I worked in London and I earned well, but commuted upwards of an hour or more a day each way. So call it 2 to 3 hours on a train. High stress train travel, bustling London, cancelled trains, crowded platforms, rush hour grind. And I always envied my ex-wife who got to be home with the kids all day. And I hated missing bath time or playtime or dinner or bedtime if a client had extended my meetings or a leaf fell on a track and the train had to be delayed. So often, for selfish reasons, I often missed trains. And my ex envied the fact that I got out of the house and spoke to other adults, and I used my brain to earn money in nice offices, and I dressed formally. Again, different perceptions. Over time, I began to work for myself and set up my own startups. And I was more flexible, so I worked from home a lot more, which felt great and was really productive. But then the COVID pandemic hit, and we were all locked up together, and our home became a school, a workplace, an entertainment center, and the hub of our family unit, but 24/7 nonstop. And unlike the lyrics from the famous Eagles song, Hotel California, we could neither check out nor leave. And although it seemed even wonderful at the time to be around more, as lockdown spanned months and then years, cabin fever set in. And even now, as I record this years later, I still work mainly from home, but there's huge downsides. For example, our children seem to believe it's not normal to never leave your house to earn a living. And as a consultant, my lifeblood is networking, and that was taken away from me a long time ago, or rather shifted to digital environments and toilets like LinkedIn, which is a whole different beast and a massive opportunity cost. So now imagine the 3 blind men are moving around feeling different beasts, let alone just one. But at least I was home more as my kids grew up. So, like the blind man and the elephant, we can all have massive divergence on what reality actually is, but then it can change and different perceptions and arguments can ensue. And my only advice and my only learning in all of the above is to remember the moral of the story, where possible. Try to understand where someone else is coming from, and if you can see the big picture, capitalize on it, but also zoom down to a different level of understanding where necessary. Now, easy to say, right? So I won't say I've cracked the application of this moral, but I often try to remember this story in a moment of conflict in business, with the kids, and in life in general. The next story is a funny one because I remember it as a child in my own way, but found out recently as an adult what it's actually called. Now, here's how I remember it before I tell you what it's called. Once upon a time, there was a small village with lots of tradespeople. One of them was a baker who specialized in making the best tasting bread in the world. And one day, the baker felt inspired and he went to the town and he announced from the town square he would make bread for the entire village, and the villagers cheered and the town square was alive. As this was going to be the biggest batch of bread he would ever make, the baker addressed the cheering crowd and he asked them, "Who will help me collect the wheat from the field?" Suddenly everyone announced how busy they were and they disappeared. The baker was alone in the square, but I guess with the echoes of the cheers, he was still motivated. So he went into the field, and over several days working alone, he stockpiled all the wheat he needed. Then he announced to the village, with all this wheat, he still wanted to make bread for everyone, and everyone cheered again. And this time he said, "Who will help me grind all the wheat into flour?" And everyone vanished with excuses. So he was still motivated. He toiled for days. He produced the flour from the wheat. Then he asked again, "Who will help me make the flour into dough?" Same thing played out. And again, when it came time to batch cook the dough that the baker necessarily had to create on his own, again, he did it all himself. Then one morning, all the villagers woke up to the wonderful smell of the best bread in the world, and they all poured into the town square again outside the bakery, drooling. The baker emerged and announced that he had achieved his goal. He'd made enough fresh, tasty bread for the whole village. And then he asked, "Who will help me eat this bread?" And the villagers cheered and they lined up. The baker said, "Wait a minute, I'm only going to share the bread with anyone who helped me." And the silence fell. Now, I can't remember if it ended with the baker eating all the bread himself or letting it rot, but the moral I take from the story and have experienced myself is that very often the people around you will always encourage your initiatives if you take them, but rarely help, or they'll make excuses not to help. And then they'll show back up if you succeed, as if they had something to do with it in the first place. It's a lesson in discreet loyalty versus ambitious vanity, short version. But as an adult researching what the story was called, I couldn't find it Googling certain terms. And then I discovered a story called The Little Red Hen, which is an American fable from about 1874. Now, it's pretty much exactly the story I just told you, but it's using animals. And in this case, it's an ambitious hen baker. And it says that the story is meant to teach children the importance of hard work and personal initiative. Now, here's the twist. Apparently, The Little Red Hen has alternate endings. So in some books, the little red hen eats all the bread but decides to give her friends another chance, and she creates a force of motivated collaborators for her next batch. Some variation, the hen has chicks who help her out with the entire process, and her family eats well and they learn a valuable family trade. Now, regardless of the fact of which ending you read, I seem to recall the story as a male human baker in a village, when in fact it's clearly a hen, and it shows how childhood memories can distort. However, the core story stuck with me through all the early years of being an entrepreneur who was always motivated to help others with whatever I did. But then I watched people cheer me on and fade away, or if I asked anything, or if I even sometimes I hired people and paid them, and they still let me down. So what's worse is if your own family or the person you choose to partner with in life loses faith in the bread you want to bake, so to speak. And life is short, and the choices you make about who you surround yourself with are crucial. That's kind of my takeaway. And on a coming back to personal, familial level, it is my wish to teach children about hard work and discipline and loyalty and patience and the value of keeping a good reputation, be that in life or with your friends or family at work. But they don't seem to read fables anymore. So I don't know. I'm juggling that one. But what seems to distract my kids now is new technology and screen time. And by the way, there are pros and cons to this, which I've discussed in previous episodes. But for their generation, this is native. And the battle of asking for help from the people I provide bread for is a struggle, I think. Many parents today probably know. Sadly, there's no solution on this episode, but I often try to weigh up all the struggles through the lens of the Little Red Hen filter. So oscillating between trying to stay motivated, trying to create something amazing and shareable for those in my community, while also leading by example. And I struggle with it every day. But finally, dear listeners, we kind of come to a fable that is what was featured on the cover art of this episode. And I come to the story last for certain reasons. This is the story of the scorpion and the frog. Here's my version, and it's told in a gender-neutral way. Once upon a time, a frog and a scorpion were sitting on an island together, and the tide was rising around them, and the island they were on was going to be submerged. Now, the scorpion can't swim. The frog can, obviously, so it jumps into the water, and it starts to swim to another island with higher ground, which won't submerge. Now, the scorpion calls to the frog and begs that the frog give it a lift so it can be saved from certain death. The frog protests. He says that its instincts are buzzing and it's most likely that the scorpion will sting it, and the frog is clearly trying to avoid death. But the scorpion applies guile and charm and convinces the frog that if it did sting, it would mean they both die, and why would the scorpion beg for its life only to be saved and die moments later? The frog got convinced. It swims back, allows the scorpion onto its back, and swims for the other island. And just as they're about to reach the safe island, the scorpion drops its stinger into the frog, and they both start to sink, just short of their goal. Now, with its last breath, the frog asked the scorpion why it did it, knowing now both of them were now terminally doomed, so close to mutual safety. And the scorpion replies, "Because I'm a scorpion." The moral of the story is that some people, despite best intentions, cannot change their inner nature and are destructive and should never be trusted. Now, it would seem that this story is from the early 20th century Russian fables, from some very high-level research, but I really don't know where to begin with how relevant to all aspects of my life this story is, but you can imagine in your own way how the moral plays out across family, love, and in business. So I'm going to now do a complete twist on this story, and I'm going to riff and really look at some alternate endings because remember, stories are meant to be played with, they're meant to spark ideas, and we can play with them in our own heads to avoid making fatal mistakes in the real world. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's play. At a basic level, this story is a yin and yang story. It's possibly a predator and prey angle, but it's certainly about mutually assured destruction. I think that's clear. And for me, the frog represents compassion, collaborative empathy, and good intentions, whereas the scorpion represents deception, disloyalty, and short-sightedness. Now, if you wanted to apply the three blind men and the elephant to this, you could switch angles and say, actually, let's switch that. So the frog represents gullibility, naivete, and meekness, and the scorpion represents initiative, blind ambition, and wit. Depends on who's asking, really. But what if the scorpion stung the frog, but it didn't die, and instead it developed immunity, and it got the scorpion and itself to safety, and they become the best of friends or business partners, and they take on the world together and achieve mass success by capitalizing on the sum of their abilities and by trusting each other after a fight? What if that was the story? What if the scorpion plays the frog and only stings it at the last minute, so the frog dies, but the scorpion jumps onto the new island at the last lap and does it over and over like some kind of serial dater, a corporate ladder climber, or political operative who fails upwards and just steps over anyone it can? Would that be a success or a failure from a societal standpoint, an individual standpoint? Or is that just someone who's really good at a career path? And does the scorpion realize that if he keeps killing the frogs in this manner by leapfrogging them, pun intended, as the climate changes, there'll be no middle class, and then everything comes down like a house of cards? You see where I'm going? Or what if they both make it? Right? They both make it, and then they mate, and they have little hybrid babies that are the best of both of them, so Scorpo frogs, that speak softly but carry a big stick. Or what if the frog and the scorpion make it to the other island, but the frog eventually dies, not from scorpion venom, but the repeated stings and disloyalty that the scorpion can never resolve? So it's the same ending, just played out over a longer timeline without therapy and the scorpion having unresolved childhood trauma. It drops on the empathetic frog who had an amazing childhood. You see how you can run these things and run things in your mind? So let me do a couple more. So what if it turned out that the scorpion's venom was like a drug, and it gets the frog high, or it amplifies the frog in some way, and now suddenly the dynamic between the two is something like a drug addiction thing? Or maybe the frog learns to microdose the venom and it creates a health product, and together they start a business, but I suspect even in that version, the scorpion will ultimately still screw over the frog, just differently. What if the frog bucks the scorpion and lets it sink, only never to trust another scorpion in the same situation who actually might be a good scorpion? What is the opportunity cost there in love and business and life? What if the frog declines to help the scorpion, but the scorpion is a serial cheater at heart, spots another frog and just snares it instead? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? What if the frog doesn't give the scorpion a lift, but encourages it to swim and coaches it to safety from a distance, but never takes credit, and the scorpion goes on to grow in confidence, learn self-reliance, and goes on to achieve great things, having had a silent mentor in life? Right, last one. What if the frog ignores the scorpion, but falls in love with another frog while swimming to the new island, but despite being in paradise, both frogs die of boredom because they're too similar? Same if there were two scorpions, but they just die on that sinking island, blaming each other for not knowing how to swim. I'll stop there. I think I've done enough. But how many times do you see everything I've just said play out on social media, for example? How many times have you seen passive-aggressive posts or name-and-shame posts or comments, people going, "Are you okay, hon?" Or trying to dominate a debate or create mic drop moments with GIFs? Social media is a modern invention, but we see people's true nature come out in strange ways, just like the story I just told you. The trick is to figure out how to spot them. And in life, Some people have the nature of the frog, and some have the nature of the scorpion. And did they get that way through nature or nurture? Don't know. But in my experience, and because the world seems pretty messy, very often we might have to try to tap into both sides of those opposite natures depending on the situation. So what would you do if the family you love was at risk and you had to leapfrog someone else to save them? Do you sting, sink, or swim? Now, I've discovered in life that many people aspire to have the qualities of the frog when the climate is right, to be selfless, heroic, maybe accountable, dependable, caring. Yet some people can't help but be the scorpion in every situation, in which case the frog could be seen as meek, naive, earnest, or even stupid. And maybe the frog is a people pleaser, and it has a hero complex, and it just wants to be loved. And the scorpion never knew kindness in its youth. It can't recognize it, and it treats all acts that are kind with suspicion, or just, frankly, just stings by default because it can't recognize the damage it inflicts in others. Hurt people. And maybe the scorpion gets off on it. But I'll wrap up with this, which I read online when I looked up the story again to see if I remembered it correctly. It says, the moral of the scorpion and the frog is that some individuals cannot resist acting in their own destructive nature, even when it harms themselves or others. It serves as a warning to be cautious of those with a history of harmful behavior, as they might be prone to repeating it. And the fable highlights the idea that certain instincts are irrepressible, and even rational beings may succumb to them. So the big moral in all of this for me, as I live day to day, and symbolically, some days I can feel like I might drown, is to try to be true to myself. I really identify mostly with the frog, but as much as I try to be a good person, even to those who have transgressed me, I aspire to be a good business partner and a good consultant and deliver value. And I try to be good and patient, but sometimes I have to decide in each moment if I need to sting to survive. Do I have to swim? So is it swim, sting, or sink? And that's kind of simplifies a lot of decision making. It's not easy. Many frogs can be scorpions in disguise, but then not all stings are fatal. It's just a question of how far can any of us swim and how many stings can we take? And that's all individual, isn't it? So all of the stories I've just recounted, they really still remind me today, now that I'm an adult, to pay attention to the details of each day. And I now often ask myself constantly, do I have the right perspective? Am I missing the big picture? Who can I count on to cheer me but also help? Who gets to share the reward if I'm successful? And where are the stable islands? And who should I avoid on the way there? Now remember what Eddie Griffith said at the beginning. Did you get the message? And my follow-up question was, did the stories you just learned spark behavior change in you or those around you for the better? Thank you for listening. To support SparkHub, please have a look at the show notes below this episode or visit thesparkhub.com to sign up for our newsletter, which offers exclusive inside scoops. Just quickly, the music you're hearing is composed by Shi Hao Yan, and the audio engineering is done by Emily Chung. My name is Allan, and I hope that you dream big and something sparked in you today.